Literally dozens. Okay, they're coming. All right, why don't we get started here?
Sure.
Um, Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. This is likely your lunchtime on the East Coast, or your breakfast time on the West Coast, or maybe second breakfast in the Mountain and Central time zones. As many of you know, I have been writing and giving a number of talks lately on the modern Republican Party, how it got to where it is today, how it operates in the age of Donald Trump. And a question I often get from people is, what comes next? What does the next presidential contest look like when Donald Trump isn't a part of it? He hasn't, it's been since 2012 was the last election he was not directly a part of. What does the party look like? Where does the party go from here? I could not have asked for a better person to discuss this with than my guest today, Jonah Goldberg. He needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Jonah is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of The Dispatch, based in Washington, D.C. Before that, Jonah was writer and senior editor for the National Review, one of the preeminent publications on American conservatism for many decades. Jonah can be seen also as a commentator on CNN. You can read his work in the LA Times. He's also a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Jonah, welcome, and I hope I got that all correct.
That was all great. Yeah, that's all generous, and it's great to be here. I'm a big fan of your stuff, and I don't know that I am the perfect person to talk about all this, but I definitely have opinions. So there's that.
Excellent. That makes you qualified.
Yeah.
So I know we're in kind of a speculative area here. I'd like to ask your perspective basically about the Republican Party to come. So first question, assuming that Donald Trump simply transitions into retirement after this term is up, which I know is a big assumption,
Sure.
But just allowing that, to your mind, what does the 2028 presidential nomination contest look like? Is he still the kingmaker? Is it a real open contest where it could really go in any direction? Does it look sort of like contests used to look like? What's your overall perspective on this?
Yeah, I think it's look. We'll just sort of stipulate for conversational purposes that either for actuarial or constitutional reasons, Donald Trump will not be president beyond the end of this term, right? And so I'm actually it is starting to deteriorate a little bit or tamp down. But for the first year of Trump's presidency, I have been stunned by how, including many friends of mine who are very close students of politics on the American right, have just sort of taken it as an article of faith that J.D. Vance would be the presumptive nominee, that he would be the heir apparent. Ross Douthat has written about it. I've had some arguments with Ross about this. That he would inherit the quote unquote the mantle from Donald Trump. And I think there are a whole bunch of analytical flaws in all that. First is, I don't think Donald Trump's mantle is transferable. His endorsement is obviously very valuable, right? But like the low propensity voters, the low information voters, the guys who love the ultimate fighting stuff and Alex Jones, the people who have this outsized view of Trump's competence and all of that, Trump can't just hand that off to somebody else. And Vance is not a particularly compelling politician. People forget that he's only won one election in his life, and he had to be dragged across the finish line, not just by Donald Trump, but also by Mitch McConnell and the NRSC. And the idea that, and in a state where the sitting normie Republican governor won by something like 28 points, and Vance won by 2 points less than what Trump won by, like 6 points or something like that. So this idea that he's got this charismatic hold on the party, I just think is wrong, or on the base or on the Trump voter is just wrong. And there's also just a larger problem is that the problem with a cult of personality candidate, and I don't mean that in some sort of deeply pejorative way. I just simply mean Trump was a celebrity candidate. He wasn't a political candidate. He had this pre-existing bond with a lot of people. We used to say in 2016 on all the TV shows, oh, the laws of political gravity will eventually take hold. And what we all missed was that the laws of political gravity are for politicians, and the laws of celebrity gravity are a completely different quantum phenomenon, right? JD Vance does not have a celebrity vibe. And moreover, as we see with the fights about Israel and about the Iran war and a bunch of other things, it turns out that the diversity of the MAGA coalition or the core Trump voter coalition is such that there are other people who are representative of that are more attractive to certain factions of the MAGA coalition. Marco Rubio has his own slice of the MAGA coalition. It's more ethnic, right? It's more East Coast.
Mhm.
It's more upscale. It's hipper, all that kind of stuff. Vance, he's making this play for like heritage Americans, and it's more white, blue collar, hillbilly elegy crowd. Though they have different aesthetics, they have different values. One of the funniest things about the downfall of Kristi Noem was that Kristi Noem and was apparently sincerely organizing to run for president in 2028, which at least suggests that she and Corey Lewandowski see some slice of the MAGA coalition that they could get. And so I think the one thing I'm very confident of is that whatever happens in the post-Trump era or in the post-Trump transition, it's not going to be simply the handing over of the ring of power.
Mhm.
It's going to be a fight, certainly a fight for his nomination, but there will also probably be a lane of people who don't want it. And Trump's superpower has always been in the primaries, not in general elections. And so I think it's not that he'll be a kingmaker, but he could be a presumptive king killer, right? He could take out people in the primaries and then through a process of elimination help Vance secure the nomination or Rubio or somebody else. But I don't think it is this thing where, he just someone can just inherit that mantle because it's Trump's and Trump's alone. And the last point I'll make, and you're much more of the cephalogist to actually do the data on this, but I kind of recall that, like I harp on this. I've been writing this column for 25 years about how it's difficult for sitting vice presidents to run for president since they amended the Constitution so that the two are on the same ticket. So what was that, 1801 or something like that? Only two sitting vice presidents have ever been elected straight to the presidency. Martin Van Buren, who had the benefit of running against like five different Whig candidates. That's always nice. And was on Andrew Jackson's coattails. And George H.W. Bush in 1988, who had the benefit of having a very popular president to succeed. And the pitch of 4 more years was pretty attractive. And he had the benefit of running against Michael Dukakis. The idea that Vance gets a mantle and is a shoo-in for the general election when if Trump is at 25% approval or 30% approval, right? Like who in the party says, "Oh, we got to make the one candidate who can't run away from Trump, who has to promise 4 more years." It may be that he's so toxic that that he doesn't even run, and there's some rumors about that. We'll see, but I just think it's going to be much more convoluted and complex than his biggest fans and his biggest foes think it will be.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. I'm trying to think like if Trump actually issues an endorsement for Vance, say, um, I would assume that would carry a lot of weight as he's proven incredibly influential with Republican primary voters. If he's not endorsing, I also have a hard time him sort of sitting silently back and watching this contest unfold and not wanting to chime in and crap all over people. There's also times when I can't figure out if he's setting Vance up for success or failure in this. Like, there's times when he seems to be kind of torturing Vance.
Oh, for
Like,
sure. I mean, that's
yeah,
part of his he doesn't want to be a lame duck.
right.
Right? So he keeps talking about how it could be Rubio, it could be Vance. Maybe they should run together because the longer it takes for him to anoint somebody, the more everybody has to look for his approval and follow his lead. Once he starts talking about his actual successor, uh, the normal sort of lame duck problems kick in faster. And that's something that Trump is just absolutely terrified of. That explains the bizarre stupidity. I mean, it worked, so who knows? But like of the going after the Indiana state legislators on the redistricting stuff is I don't think it had very much to do with redistricting. I think it had to do with idea that Trump wants to maintain fear in the hearts of Republican elected officials so that they still understand that he is still the chief threat to their incumbency, and that they will be, if they don't love him, they will at least fear him enough not to get out of line after the midterms. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I'm curious. I agree with what you're saying about, should Vance become the nominee, like what the general election looks like. I mean, just generally, it's hard for, whoever the nominee is of someone who has been in power, particularly in this very anti-incumbent environment, to win. Vance might have Trump's backing in the primaries, but that doesn't automatically convey the people who turn out for Trump in general elections to him. So I
Yeah, I mean,
think
I'm curious. I mean, maybe
that would
there's
be
a
tough.
term in
Yeah.
political science for this, but like, if the economy is going well and Trump's approval ticks up, you could actually see a bunch of people getting into the race, right?
Mhm.
Um, if his approval is just totally in the gutter and the economy is in really terrible shape, you could see Vance getting the nomination in part because everyone else says it's a poison chalice. I'll wait 4 years, right? I mean, Tom Cotton wants to be president. I think that this is a established fact. Marco Rubio, I think we can count on wanting to be president, but they're young enough that if it just looks like a year where the Republican ticket is doomed, let Vance have it, right? So then in some
Yeah.
ways, the worse it gets, the more likely he is the nominee. It's that sweet spot. If Trump gets up to 47% approval again and the economy's looking okay, it could actually be a nomination worth fighting for. And that makes it kind of more interesting in terms of whether or not Trump can transfer his authority with the base.
Yeah. It's funny. I sort of wonder how much in this era where we just have very close presidential elections where they're all settled by a couple of points. If there's ever a point where someone says, well, there's no way my party's going to win this year. So, let this guy I don't like have the nomination. I always think back, and this is dating us, back to, there was
92.
a, or yeah, well, there was the Saturday Night Live skit in '91 where
Uh-huh.
they did the debate. Who wants to be the Democratic candidate to lose to George H.W. Bush? When Bush had approval ratings like in the '80s or something
Right.
like that. Coming right out of the Gulf War. But obviously, tides can turn, and we have much closer election these days.
Well, what's
I'm
funny about that,
curious.
because
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
that's why I mentioned '92 is like, I mean, I remember that. I remember reading about this in the New Republic that, like, I mean, at the time that, Cuomo decided not to run because Bush's approval was so high, and they figured we'll wait 4 years and then there'll be the FDR, the new FDR in like '96 and all that. And so that's why that '92 field was called the Seven Dwarfs. And
Mm.
Clinton got in basically just to boost his name ID, and then it turned out, oh my gosh, I can win this thing because HW's popularity is plummeting. So it is kind of interesting to think about. Politics are about moments, and sometimes you can seize the moment, and sometimes you just have to hope the moment, shows up for you. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no, that's cool. I'm curious. In a semi-competitive Republican nomination process in 28, like who do you think some of the key figures are in determining who wins? Like, is this all going to come down to Trump's endorsement, assuming he makes one? Is this going to be about media figures? Is this a situation where like there's really no party insiders left who have any control over the party, and it's really just about whoever has the most enthusiastic voter base? What do you see that looking like?
Yeah, so it's hard. I actually, so I have a prediction. Um, when exactly it manifests itself depends on Trump's relative power status, whatever. I mean, it could be wait until after the 2028 cycle, or it could come before. But I can just tell you from the sociology of Washington and American conservatism generally, there is a building movement. I say movement because it's not orchestrated. It's different factions coalescing into something that could gel into a movement of people who are like, yeah, this Trump thing delivered some wins, delivered some losses, and all of that, but um, we need to get back to being sort of a Reaganite party kind of thing. I mean, Mike Pence's think tank operation, where they poached all of the sane people from Heritage, is part of that. Leonard Leo, who was the founder of the Federalist Society, is now sort of getting in to the more directly political game. And like I haven't talked to him about any of this, but the word on the street is that it's like there's a sort of it's a restorationist kind of view of now that Trump is kind of turning on the conservative legal movement, what use is he to people who believe in the conservative legal movement kind of thing. The Koch crowd, all these people, they're laying low because to pick up your head and attack Trump now is just deadly. But there's a lot of sort of sub rosa planning going on about some kind of restoration. Will it succeed? I don't know. But I think we've talked about this in the past. One of the comforts I took from the 2020 four primaries was that, with the exception of Vivek Ramaswamy, virtually everybody up on those debate stages, because Trump wasn't on them, basically spoke the language of Reagan. Now, there were some serious differences because the Reagan coalition was more diverse than people realize, and there were some sort of different kinds of conservatives in that coalition. But whether it was Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, they all spoke a version of sort of a Reagan, because it's the only muscle memory they have. And since Trumpism isn't an intellectual, coherent philosophy or phenomenon, anyone tries to imitate him has implodes. And I think it's telling that Ramaswamy in Ohio, who it's like he was designing an East German lab to piss me off. I can't stand the guy, but he ran much more like a normie Republican in Ohio for governor than he did up on that stage in the primaries. And so I think that partly because of muscle memory, part because they don't. Trump has never provided a coherent alternative language to speak, plus a lot of nostalgia for normalcy on the right. You could definitely see it gelling that there is. I mean, I know we're not supposed to talk about lanes anymore, but like, I don't think Nikki's going to run, but like a Nikki Haley type, Mike Pompeo type, someone who has some credibility in Trump world, while at the same time saying this was great, but we need to move on and we need to get back to some of our core values and speak in a kindler, gentler way and all that. I think that's it. We're not going to get to the status quo ante ever. The damage that Trump has done is so profound, and the generation of sort of social media besotted Groyper jackasses is too large and too embedded in so many of the conservative institutions to completely go away. But I think we could regress towards the old mean rather than continue the arc of Trumpism as we now understand it.
Okay, yeah, this is really interesting, and I think we have similar perspectives on this. I was really kind of struck, I think, as you were, by watching some of those debates in 2024 among the Republican candidates who Trump wasn't there. And again, with the exception of Ramaswamy, that kind of looked like and sounded like it could have been a debate from 2012 or something like that.
Yeah.
And these were conventionally qualified candidates. These were governors, members of Congress, a former vice president. And, they were speaking about, conservative issues and they, to some extent, trying to imitate Trump, but not really going after him either. I'm actually really curious, coming out of that, we ended up in not a very long actual series of primaries and caucuses, but some. And in those, from like New Hampshire forward, I think on average, Nikki Haley was getting something like a third of the vote
Yeah.
in Republican contests. And those were people who almost invariably knew Donald Trump was about to become the nominee, still wanted to cast a vote for something different. And I'm curious what you see, what happens to those voters are still there as far as I can tell.
Right.
And I'm curious, do you see them, do they have more power? Do they have more influence or a louder voice once Trump is no longer part of the scene? Do they have abilities to, like, maybe at least things make more competitive, if not necessarily steer things back to an older coalition?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm trying not to make hope the father of the thought here, right? But one would like to live in a world where more like normie, sane conservatives had more of a voice in the Republican Party than less. But I think one of the reasons why I think a more traditional conservative type will have more power in a post-Trump era is for the simple reason that arguments have to matter more in a post-Trump environment than they matter in a Trump environment, because they don't matter at all in a Trump environment, right? Marshaling facts and logic and reason and evidence gets you almost nowhere in a Trumpified GOP. But when Trump is not in the equation, normal voters who may have voted for Trump 3 times, they actually start listening again, right? I mean, like Ron DeSantis, he had these amazing focus groups when he was running for president, where he would have the focus groups. He would ask them, "What do you think about the shutdowns during COVID?" And it would be a 70-30 against these were terrible. And the second you called them the Trump shutdowns or under Trump, the number flipped the other way. Right. And so for whatever reason, I personally think it's part of it's Trump's manifest unfitness and weakness that causes a lot of his people to overcompensate and say he's awesome because they can't acknowledge the reality of it. But whatever the psychological reasons for it, a lot of these people become normal people when Trump isn't like the magnet next to the compass distorting everything. And so there will be big disagreements, right? Like Israel is a generational thing in the GOP. There are lots of those kinds of things that are coming along. But what's really kind of interesting is, or one of the things that's interesting, if you look at like the CNN polling on a lot of this, um, the people who describe themselves as MAGA are the most supportive of the Iran war. It's the ones who just describe themselves as Republicans that it drops from like 90% to 60 something, 70 something. I haven't seen it lately, but that was, about a month ago. That's the case.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it gets to this cult of personality thing. And it's just that there are certain people who just support Trump and they'll look up the arguments later. Once you get Trump out of the equation, I think the Trump lovers are a very diverse group, because I've met Trump lovers who are bat guano crazy, who think the dumbest conspiracy theories are true and all that kind of stuff. And I've met Trump lovers who love him because of his enemies, or they love him because of the Supreme Court, or they just find him endlessly entertaining. And they say, yeah, of course he's wrong, but it's just so great. Right. So the diversity of reasons why people support Trump is weird to me, but it's real. And once you get rid of it, people might start actually listening to Mike Pence again, right? He's not a compelling speaker sometimes, but like he's a solid dude and he has real arguments and real facts to bring, and you can disagree with them, and that's fine. Nikki Haley is a very good, makes a very good argument about things. Ron DeSantis is going to run again, and so I just think it's going to be much more of a free for all. And this idea that the MAGA coalition stays intact, I just think is just obviously wrong. It doesn't mean that Vance doesn't get the lion's share of it, but all of a sudden they're going to be just different factors, different players in the mix. What the Club for Growth does, I don't know. Like, they bought their way back into Trump's good graces with this Indiana stuff, right? There has been a split in the conservative egghead community like never before. Like Heritage was always a little more of a populist-oriented DC Capitol Hill lobbying firebrand place, but it had a lot of serious people, and you just didn't speak ill about fellow think tankers and all of that kind of stuff on the right. This is the world I grew up in. I've been associated with AI in one way or another for over 30 years. I just open cans of whoop ass on Kevin Roberts as someone who's done enormous damage to his institution and to the right generally, and it's perfectly acceptable in the discourse now. And so the sort of the spider webbing fracture of the intellectual firmament on the right is really unpredictable, and we haven't seen anything like it really since the early 1960s, and makes it very difficult to predict, like, do opinion leaders matter in this environment?